What's going on, everybody? What's going on? Appreciate y'all patience. We're gonna give everybody about like 2 minutes to get on. Today's gonna be a good one. This is I'm going to get into kind of like my framework and really talk about the key factors that made me switch from multifamily into industrial. Let's get started. This is our second industrial webinar. Where we discuss the secrets of industrial real estate, specifically light industrial real estate. And I'm gonna talk about what light industrial is. There's different classes, and I'm not talking about A, B, and C, but there's different levels to multifamily, and then there's different levels and different subclasses within the industrial world also. So it gets really cool. To me, it gets really interesting. And we're going to get into it right now. So just kind of going over like some housekeeping rules. Have fun. That's my motto. If you really know me, I am somebody, all I do is have fun. My fun may not always look like, hey, I'm laughing and smiling. But there's probably, if I'm not laughing and smiling, there's probably a game that I'm playing on the inside. Like even today, um, me and my fiance yesterday, we said, all right, like let's do this challenge. Every day we gotta do 100 squats and 100 push-ups. Cool. It's a game for me because I want to figure out how fast can I get to 100. How many less sets do I have to get in order to get to 100? Second thing is let's make sure we participate. I'm going to ask for interaction. Third thing, positive vibes only. Like I don't do the negativity. Q&A. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation. Take notes. Make sure you do that because not too many people know of the industrial assets that are in the real estate world. Me personally, I did not know that as a regular person, I could invest in industrial buildings. I just didn't know that. I didn't know that until I had a conversation with a broker, and I'll probably talk about that later. And then lastly, last rule is the first rule. Have fun. We're here to learn, and for me, learning is having fun. I'm going to make this as interactive as possible, and we just going to get it. So let's get it. All right, so I always want to start with who am I? Like, why am I here? Why am I in this position where I'm talking about light industrial real estate? And it really just started with me as a kid, 8 years old. I knew that I had some type of entrepreneurial mindset, some type of investor mindset as an 8-year old kid. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go build a lemonade stand, go sell some lemonade. Because it wasn't even about the money. It was just about the idea. Only reason why I didn't even take on that idea was because I didn't have excuse me, I didn't have the courage and I didn't have the the environmental resources to support that idea. So I thought that, you know what, this probably not right now. There was something going on in the background, which I'll talk about in this slide too a little bit later, how the entrepreneurial mindset transition. But I was a quiet kid. I was a reserved kid. I was a playful kid. Like I could get along with anybody as I still can today. But I wasn't the type of kid to go out of my way, go talk to somebody. I didn't really talk when I was in high school. If you ask anybody who knew me in high school, I was the type of kid who came in with a black hoodie, sat in the furthest chair from the middle and front of the room, and I sat there with my arms folded, slouched in the chair as if I didn't want anybody to call on me. I didn't want no attention. Wanted none of that. Basically the opposite of kind of who I am today. I ended up going to Ohio State, graduated with an agricultural engineering degree, started pursuing entrepreneurship 10 months after I started my first job out of college. I was like, nah, this ain't for me. Because I always knew that working for somebody else was not, it just wasn't the route that I wanted to go. And during that period of me being self employed, I had a candle business, failed, had a clothing line, failed, had a music business, yeah, music production, music engineering. I just pursued music for a bit of time. And I wouldn't say that it failed, but I definitely wasn't willing to carry it out. And interestingly enough, I actually got music out there as a producer and as an artist. So that's pretty cool. Just a little fun fact. Also during that time where I was self-employed, I learned how to trade. And that's where I realized that as a kid, I did not necessarily have an entrepreneurial mindset. I had an investor's mindset. I always thought about, okay, what is the risk and how does this risk compare to the reward? And if the reward, and I didn't really care about short term, and I would do all of this like quickly in my head. Like my mom would ask me a question and I could give her an answer like immediately because I ran the risk to reward evaluation in my head so quickly, it was unbelievable to me looking back at it, especially as a kid who didn't even hit puberty yet. I was doing that. But I started to, after I hit my low in life, living with my uncle, with my family, my two kids, and my children's mother, I was like, all right, something got to change. I started getting financially literate and I moved back up to Philly. And that's when I was like, all right, we got to start from the basics. The best basics I could do work with right now is working for somebody else. I can go back to the company that one I have massive big connections in, and also I could get into very easily because of those well, not just because of those connections, but because they needed people. So I found I found a need and I fulfilled it. And it just so happened that the position that I chose was something that I was already kind of interested anyway because it was design and I liked design when I was in college. My introduction into real estate occurred last year while I'm working this job. I've been at my job for almost 4 years now. And I started out with tax liens, tax deeds, started, you know, mixing and mingling with the people who were in the company, running the sales department, running their mentorship program. And I had a conversation. I was privately chosen. And because of my work ethic, because I showed up, and it was just like, okay, you need connections. You need, like, we could pair you with the people, but we don't do that anymore. I was like, okay, so how do I get those connections? Well, you just go on Facebook. Okay, well, I could do that with anything else, which took me to multifamily on one of Grant Cardone's webinars. That's when I got interested into commercial real estate, large multifamilies. His big thing is go big, go home. Interestingly enough, that's how I think. I think go big, go home. And what he said made sense. And then a few months later, I got introduced into industrial real estate. And this is just a conversation that I had with the broker as I was giving feedback to him on a property that I wasn't no longer interested in. But once again, I called this broker to form a relationship because the cool thing about commercial real estate is it's a team sport. You don't have to tackle it by yourself. And if you probably do, you'll burn out and you probably won't continue. That's not based off of my experience, but everybody who's in my circle who's in commercial real estate or even in residential real estate, they don't do this by themselves. So that's a that's kind of like where I'm from, why I'm here, who I am. And the main reasons why I do this is because these the third person is not here. in this picture. The third person is my fiance. But those two people, those two little people, the one who's right behind my head, and if you see that blue dress in the background, that's my daughter. She's just like me. She's a nature girl. She likes playing in the rocks. She'll put her hands in the water. She'll put her feet in the water. That's what I do it for every single day. If you ask me what gets me up every single day at 4:30 without an alarm clock, it's the idea that I could change their lives. The reason why I brought them into this world was because I wanted to help change the world. I wanted to leave an impact. That's my legacy. So, in this specific presentation, I want to go over my 5-step framework, my 5 filters that I go through. And the first one is location. It doesn't matter what asset class you get into, residential, multifamily, whatever. The location is always going to matter, but the criteria for the location is just going to be a little bit different. In an industrial, it's different than multifamily. It's different than residential. It's different than self-storage. It's different than retail properties. It's different than all the other asset classes because every asset class has its own way in which it impacts the community. And what I always look for when I'm looking at location, if I'm doing that 5 minute scan, is I'm looking at where is it located. If it's located on a major corridor, that's great. And if you don't know what a major corridor is, it's literally a major strip, a major street that usually is probably some type of state highway, some type of state freeway, just somewhere where there's a lot of traffic on a consistent basis. And uh, that's where you really want them to be because visibility is key. And there's another aspect, which I will talk about later in the presentation, that is also key. And just like I said, you want to make sure that it's visible. No, you're not going to have regular consumers coming into these properties, but you will have workers who are coming into these properties. And these workers, they could be truck drivers, like tractor trailer drivers, or they could be just regular, your large vans. But you want it to be visible. The second piece of this is the tenants. Now, the cool thing about the tenants and what's different than multifamily is the fact that when these tenants are not regular people, these tenants are businesses. And you want to make sure that these businesses are also solid. So if you have any background in the stock market or you have some type of understanding of how to look at businesses, what's a good business, what's a bad business, or that, or the third, you can really understand this aspect of my framework, which, hey, if it's Verizon, for example, Verizon is a national company. It's publicly traded in the United States. It has national impact. No matter what your experience or your opinion on Verizon's services are, they are a national company, and that would make them a highly qualified tenant. You might have a local company. And once again, everything goes based on the scoring system. So even the location, that has a scorecard. Tenants have a scorecard. It's we got national. That's going to be the highest one, national or regional. Because why? Because there is a likelihood that they're going to stay longer term. They're going to stay past the lease that's in place, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The likelihood for them staying there is high. When you get to local, the likelihood of them staying is high, but it's just a little bit lower than national and regional companies, just because it's just a local company. And then you have what would make a weak tenant is if the property were vacant or the business model just really doesn't work. So that's where I say weak tenant, no thank you. Vacant, don't do it. Like I said, I am a cash flow from day one investor. Now, here's one of my favorite. Now we're starting to get into what really got me sold on industrial properties. It was the lease structure. If we're going to compare this to, let's just say, multifamily, because multifamily is the most popular in commercial real estate. You're the landlord. I mean, you own the property. You have to kick out money for everything. That tenant, unless you got a relationship with that tenant, y'all got an agreement, you as the landlord are responsible for everything. Broken toilet, as the landlord, you fix it. Hole in the wall, you as the landlord gotta go fix it. Roof, you as the landlord gotta get that repaired and replaced. If it has a cooling unit, a central air unit, you as the landlord has to pay to get that replaced. But when we get to the leases of industrial properties, there are different lease structures in which the landlord may cover some responsibilities or may completely not cover anything. And I'm even talking about property taxes and insurance and the roof. So capex, property taxes, and insurance will be covered completely by the tenant. But this is all based on lease structure. Also, I love the terms. When you're a multifamily, there these terms they can range from a month to month all the way to maybe 2 years, depending on whether there were concessions offered or whatever offers you're giving to tenants at that period. But I don't see too many leases that last 24 months. That's just in my personal experience. Now, I do have a question. If you had a tenant who signed a 5-year lease, and with the last point on this, with rent bumps included, so you don't have to increase the rent, it's already built into the lease structure. Is that something that you would sign on to? I know I would. Like I said, that's what sold me. I don't have to worry about, I don't have to think about whether this tenant is leaving next year. I don't have to think about whether this tenant is leaving 2 years from now. I literally can say, okay, for the next 5 years, I know that somebody's going to be in this space. For the next 10 years, I know that this tenant or the probability of this tenant being here for the next 5, 10, 15 years is high. And then included in that lease structure is rent bumps. I know that next year I can predict that if I'm making $100,000 in this property, next year I'll be making $102,500 on this property. So I don't have to control. I don't want to control. I don't want to have to go in and give a reason why I'm increasing the rent. It's already built in. Now there is a trade-off to the built-in rent bumps of the lease structure, which is if the market all of a sudden is on an upswing and now the market calls for higher rent bumps, you'll miss out on that because of the lease structure. But for me, as a father of 2 6 year olds, and everything that I have going on in my everyday life, because I do also have a W-2, I don't care about that much control. I just want something solid, stable, and predictable. That's me. But that is also what attracted me to the industrial asset class. Now we get into the third framework, which would be the layout. Why is the layout important? Because we can either have a single tenant, which there's nothing wrong with that. Once again, you can have a single tenant in which they're going to be there for the next 20 years. I actually know of a property, it's still up for sale. This property has been up for sale since the end of mid last year. It's a good year. It's a single tenant. Their contract is for, if I'm not mistaken, 15 years. So they have a 15-year long lease term. But we also have the multi-tenant aspect where, of course, multiple tenants gives you a bit more breathing room and a bit more security just in case one tenant leaves. Because with that single tenant, that's just like having a single family home. If that tenant leaves, well, now you don't have any income. So that's why all of these things that are property specific, and I'm not talking about market like the location specifically, but we've already talked about the tenant itself, which is also the lease structure. And now we're talking about the actual layout of the property. And also, you want to make sure that, let's just say, you can turn this entire layout into something else. So right here, we have an example of what an industrial property's layout could be. And depending on the size, you can reconfigure. The true story, I went to a flex industrial property back in, I think it was October. And this was the first time I ever heard of movable walls. So, movable walls changed the game for me. Why? Because when he told me what movable walls were, I was like, oh, so that gives the tenant, which is the business, the ability to say, I don't like the layout of the space that I'm given. Our business requires a little bit of division. Maybe they need an office area, or maybe they need separation. And this layout is true. The property that I went to go see, they put a movable wall. It was a biopharmaceutical company that was based out of China, and they put a movable wall there to separate the office area from their refrigeration area. They had like 50 refrigerators in there. Cool. They use movable walls to change around their space. And you can also change around the space as the owner. So let's just say a tenant leaves. You can now divide that space up. So we go back to the bullet point before. It's a single tenant. Okay, it's a single tenant. If it's large enough, you can now put a wall in between there, or two walls in between there, or rather four walls in between there. And now you got four different spaces. Now you can bring in four different tenants to create your multi-tenant situation. Another thing is door height that you definitely want to consider. The bigger the doors, the more versatile the property can be. Uh, and especially for big, like warehouse buildings, you want bigger doors. Like, and when I say bigger, we're talking about 24 feet. It's important because you might have a tenant that requires tractor trailers. I actually talked to someone, he worked in a warehouse. I worked in a warehouse when I was in Atlanta. I worked for FedEx. And when that truck backs up and it cannot fit in the door, that's a problem. That's not just a problem for the people who are going to be loading the truck. It's also going to be a problem when you're trying to, for safety measures, because now you might have a gap. And you don't, trust me, it's a very scary feeling when you got to carry a package that might be a little bit too heavy for you, and you got to cross this gap in which one false move, your foot is going down there, and if that truck moves, you just lost a leg. So the door height can be very important, specifically for safety reasons, and also for future tenants. You might have, if it's smaller, that's great, but if it's bigger than the door, that could lead up to a later problem. And then another piece is your circulation. Think about circulation like your blood. If you have a clogged artery, your blood's not circulating properly. It's the same thing with industrial properties. If trucks cannot easily access the property, that could create a problem. And as I spoke about later with location, because once again, all of these aspects they tie into each other. It's all interconnected. It's all connected to each other. the circulation also has to do with the accessibility from highways. So let's just say, you know, this property is 2 miles away from the nearest highway. Well, I wouldn't invest in that property. Why? Because it takes too long for that driver to get from the building to being able to comfortably drive to his or her next destination. And their destination could be 100 miles. It could be 50 miles. It could be 25 miles. But they're not going to, most times, it's not going to be a local situation. And you don't want your drivers agitated when they're trying to maneuver around your property and the layout calls for tractor trailers and they have to do a bunch of maneuvering so that way they could get to the door that they need to pull up to. That's something that you just don't want. I see it at least once a week with my W-2 job because one of the hospitals is finishing up their building and they have to transport in big materials. So they use tractor trailers and there's a very sharp turn that's probably maybe 40 degrees that backs up traffic for at least the next 30 minutes. So that's why circulation is super important. The other part of my framework that I focus on is the cash flow. I'm not investing because I'm looking for the appreciation. That's not where I am in my journey. I don't know if I'll ever be there, but I do know I'm looking for cash flow. Now, do I necessarily promote this picture? Absolutely not. But it is the premise of the picture. It's it's about the income outweighing the expenses. When your income outweighs your expenses, you can now you know that that's cash flow. My children, they know the cash flow equation. If they were here, they'd spit it out. I could invite them on, hey, Akil, what's how do you get cash flow? And they'd say income minus expenses. Nairobi, how do you calculate cash flow? Income minus expenses. They know that. You also want to be able to make sure know that that the income from the property is mitigating your risk. And the risk that I'm talking about is the debt service. If it does not outweigh how much your annual debt service would be, it's a no deal. It's no completely no deal. Unless you're in it for appreciation or you're okay with that because you see the value, the future value that you can bring to this property. And some people do invest for those specific reasons, which is absolutely okay. That's just not my strategy. You if it just matches, if your income just matches the debt service with the expenses, well, then you most likely going to have a lending problem in which you probably won't be able to find a lender for that specific property because once again this is commercial, and when you think of commercials that are you think of a business. Even when you're watching TV or you're on YouTube watching a video, those ads, those are the same thing as commercials. And when these commercials are on, that's a business that's being presented to you because this is a person or entity that's providing a service. It's the same thing. And then we also want to know how fast can we get investors money back. That's why we want to make sure that it cash flows because most of the time you're going to get investors who want to get paid quarterly. They may want to see their return in 5 years. That's very common in the commercial space. I want to see my return in 5 years. You might get people who are okay seeing their money come back to them in 10 years. But the biggest thing is you want to make sure that your investors are going to get paid, have the potential to get paid. And just like I said with the previous ones, excuse me, that's why I like these because they provide stable income. They provide predictable income, more predictable income because of rent bumps. We know that these are businesses. If you did your homework, you know that you have a higher inclination that a business is going to pay their rent versus will this person in this multifamily home, once again, I'm not bashing it, I'm just stating facts. Will they pay their rent? We're not sure. The final framework kind of goes into the one that I just talked about, which is mitigating risk. And the reason why it's here twice is because that's more important. Risk can kill a deal. And if you improperly, if you aggressively evaluate it, you might lose you might lose out on a good deal. The numbers added up, but you didn't factor in the risk appropriately. So the debt structure is very important. What is the interest rate? What are the term? What is the loan term? What is the amortization period? How much debt am I getting out on this property? You also want to look at the building usage and the potentials, the environmental risk. Okay, is this a flood area? The risks are very similar across all asset classes. But the most important risk is, of course, going to be the money risk. Also, is going to be the environmental risk because you can't control the environment. If you're in a floodplain, it's probably going to flood if there's a large enough thunderstorm, and all of a sudden, and flooding destroys the structural foundation, can destroy the structural integrity of the actual building, no matter what it is. And you also want to look at how is the building being used, which is why I lean more towards light industrial. Because if you think about it, if there's a lot of vibration, that means there's a lot of movement. Anytime there's a lot of movement, that's the weakening of some type of mechanical part. Okay, door dock doors are going up and down. That's the weakening of those chains, those pulleys that are opening and closing these garage doors. So you want to make sure that you understand all of the risks, not just the debt. Yes, debt kills deals, and that's why it's at the top because you want to pay attention to that the most. That's why I heavily stress test so conservatively that I put the interest rate at 10% because who knows what will happen? Who knows what a lender is going to give you? And especially if you got to close on this deal and you need you need the lender to give you the money, it could be 10%. That could be the best that anybody in the area could offer. But you also want to look at how the building is being used, which is why, like I said, I look at light industrial, not too many foot traffic. Um, it, in the one property that I was spoke about earlier that introduced me into industrial real estate, every single the day that I went in, only it was 5 units, only two of them had employees in there that like 2 units had employees. And in these 2 units, there was only two people. So it's just like, okay, we know that the structural integrity will remain very stable. It will be very stable for a long period of time. Not too much structural issues are gonna will turn up, which is great. Now, did I go after this? No, because once again, the numbers don't add up. Not for me anyway. And that's why it's been on the market for almost a year now. So I want to give this to everybody, this opportunity to stay connected with me outside of the webinar. And what that would mean, you scan this QR code, you'll be put on our investors list. It's completely free. All we're doing is we just be giving you extra education on industrial commercial real estate, market observations that I see, any deal analysis and underwriting perspectives that come my way. Also, any updates on potential deals in the future. Maybe well, I'm sure I'll be coming across something at some point. You'll have access to that first and foremost before to anybody else aside from anybody that I'm on a team with. And then you'll also continue to stay in the loop of any future webinars or educational events that I have. So I want to take this opportunity to open it up for any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you were talking about like being a landlord and everything else, and you're describing the different types of leases. So in that instance, as a landlord, would you rather look for those leases that are like absolute triple ends then, where it's pretty much a set it, forget it, you have absolutely zero responsibilities?
That's usually what most people go for in the industrial space. Um, if I had to put my speculations on it, it's because, and this is just me being connected to people who invest in industrial properties. Most of them go for absolute net or triple net. And it's because, just like you said, it's a set it and forget it. Literally, I have equity in this property, and all I have to do is check to make sure that you're still there. We're still good. You don't need anything from me. You pay all the bills, or if you don't pay all the bills, because absolute net and triple net are different, it's very similar but slightly different. In which absolute net, the tenant pays for the expenses directly. Whereas triple net, you get, as the owner, you get reimbursed for whatever the lease agreement says. Does that answer your question?
So what you mean by reimburse? So the company will reimburse you for those expenses? I'm a little lost on that one.
Yes. So you will, so let's just say, for example, I'm using this example because this was probably one of my favorite properties that I looked at. But a common one for triple net is landscaping and or snow plowing. That you're gonna, especially if you live in a snowy area, you're gonna need at least one of those, if not both of them. You're gonna have to pay somebody to do the landscaping, do the plowing. That could be the same company, but you're gonna have to pay for that. Now, in that, if it's triple net, that could be you paying for it. So let's just say, okay, we're getting that cash flow every single month. We're able to put capital reserves to the side, whatever the case may be, or we that's a monthly expense. We pay as the landlord. You pay the company directly, and then when rent is due from the tenant reimburses you for that money. Does that make sense?
Got it. That does
Yeah.
make sense now. So the pretty much what the absolute net is, it's reimbursed because it's already calculated into their rent.
So when you get to the absolute net, you can have it to where, and triple net, absolute net are amazing, and I love why it even exists, because, and I love why industrial exists also, is because since they're businesses, some businesses require a certain layout, they require certain things. And if you have a flex space, not every unit is going to be laid out the same, as I gave in the example earlier. So they can pay for their layout in that lease structure. They pay for the expenses. So if they need movable walls to be put up to for some separation reasons, they pay for that. Or you might have triple net, okay, or the lease agreement might be you pay for it as the landlord and they reimburse you. And a good way, in true story, the one that I talked about that's near me, they were clever enough to allow one of their tenants to they it's called a outdoor storage unit, basically. And they allowed the landscaping company to have a small pocket of the land to store their equipment, so that way they could just come in, do the landscaping, they come out, they pay a small portion of in regards to rent. That was something clever that I saw. I was like, oh wow. And then he was like, hey, if you want to keep them, if you feel like, it works, keep them. If it doesn't work, you can let them go when the lease is up. I was like, oh shoot, I didn't even think that was the thing. So yep, it gets crafty in the in with industrial properties or just with lease structures, period. But usually, just like you said, people who are going for the triple nets and the absolute nets, they are looking for a set it and forget it situation. They don't have to worry about anything. Pay the bills. I know I'm getting that money back. And when you look at the OMs, when you look at the financials, if it's triple net, you're going to see that there's expenses from you as the landlord, but in the income column and in the income area, you're going to see that there's reimbursements. Absolute net is just going to be straight cash flow. Now, the cash flow is what attracted me. Not going to lie. I was attracted to the money when I got started. I was like, oh, snap. Uh, 500,000? That's how much I'm taking home? That's a bet. For 5 tenants? I'm definitely with that. What else? How do we make this how do we make this work? I like, for me it was like I don't want to have a whole bunch of tenants. Yes, it creates, a little bit more security, because if one tenant leaves, you have other tenants to kind of keep the property afloat. But when I saw industrial and I was like, oh, tenants will stay longer, that gives me a little bit more sense of security, especially with the with the type of asset class that we're talking about, because we're not talking about retail, we're talking about industrial. And usually, if you're doing your homework properly, these tenants have some type of foothold in the community, because if they still there, they you would think that they do. Whether they're especially if they're local, if they're national, they already did their homework. Just kind of like with Starbucks and Walmart and Amazon, they did the homework already. All we're doing is just saying, okay, how's the history? How's the location? What are the fundamentals? What are the financials? Okay, green light, red light. However, we're going to move. I hope I answered your question. And if you have any more, please feel free to ask.
Um, Property taxes and roofing. I've seen a couple of those. So as a triple net, a landlord is responsible for that, correct? Versus whereas with absolute triple net, the landlord is not responsible. Did I understand that correctly?
It's always going to be dependent on the lease. I've seen triple
Got
net leases where the tenant is responsible for the roof. So the 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 lease flexibility, like I said, and I keep saying it, I'm going to keep saying it to anybody. You could get real crafty with the leases. Now, I'm not saying get crafty to a point where you're the only that where the landlord, you as the landlord is the only one that benefits. But you want to make sure that the lease terms, the lease benefits you as well as the tenant. And you can, I've seen, like I said, I've seen triple net, and the landlord is responsible for structural damage and roof. I've seen it where the landlord is not responsible. It's all dependent on the lease itself, what you as the landlord and the tenant are willing to come together on. That answered your question, yes?
Yes, that did.
Okay.
Um, I know you were talking about commercial and industrial. may you kind of clarify really what those two terms, like, are you like for like industrial, are you talking about like more like warehouses, like the FedEx warehouses, UPS warehouses, Amazon? Because I know you had mentioned Starbucks and Walmart, but those I thought were more like commercial, not necessarily industrial. So could you clarify really what those two differences are?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I said, with the Starbucks situation, um, Starbucks is retail, just like you said. So you're correct with your thought process, and you were also correct with the industrial aspect. There's different categories of industrial. You have warehouses, and when we talk about warehouses, those are like your Amazon. Like think about it. Well, it may not necessarily be Amazon or a company like Amazon because that is also considered distribution, but a warehouse could be housing a manufacturing company. You also have refrigeration companies who use industrial properties in which that setup will be different. You have basic service businesses that might be operating out of what we may call a light industrial property where it's not too huge. They're not bringing in like tractor trailers. They might just have like your what are they called? The Nissan Transit, the big vans that that, or it could be a lawn service business. It could be some type of landscaping, anything like that. That's also a type of industrial property. Um, you and then you can also have your flex properties, which is more of how where I lean. And flex properties are mainly just like big buildings or long buildings. I mean, may not necessarily be vertically big, but they have enough space to house multiple businesses. So it could be three businesses, it could be five businesses, but it gives enough space to where similar to the property that I talked about that I spoke about earlier, where these businesses can have an office and then they can have storage in the back for their equipment, or they can have storage in the back for their products. A great way to think about that is if, let's just say, I'll say this because I did own a t-shirt business for a while. Let's just say I was big enough to need some type of property that allows me to have an office. I don't need to ship anything out necessarily, but I can run like transit vans or little box trucks and that can come to the back, one door garage, and we just load up the truck with all the boxes so we can ship out our t-shirts. And then next to me is another business, and next to that is another business. That's also your your flex industrials too. Does that make sense?
It does. It clarifies it just a little bit better. So like a mattress company or something like that.
Uh, the match for the mattress company, it wouldn't be the place that it's operating out of. So like your Bob's Furniture, that would not be considered industrial. That would be considered retail because this is a business that's providing a direct service to the public. Your industrial, if you're talking about mattress, they're storing and distributing those mattresses or whatever product that they're selling to the actual retail store. So that would be considered a distribution industrial property.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Any other questions? If not, uh, feel free to send an email. You can reach out to us and you can get on the investors list. That way you're updated anytime we have anything, whether it's a deal, whether it's educational material, whether it's webinar, any type of event. If not,
Is
Precious,
that investor list is that investor list on the Blink link?
yes, it is.
Okay.
So when you scroll down, it'll say investors link. You could click on that. It'll take you to the investors page, and you can sign up through there. Once again, like I said, it costs nothing to be on the investor list. It is literally just a way for you to continuously be connected and you to have direct access to us so that way we can continue to serve you with information, events, anything of the deals, anything of the nature. All right. Well, I appreciate all of you for joining me today. I hope it was very useful. Once again, if you have any more questions, you know how to contact us. We're going to keep doing this. You will know when the next one is. We do this monthly. So, you get the recording. So we'll be doing this again next month. All right. Well, I want everybody else to enjoy the rest of their day.